about to start our first Neo series educator session for the year. Very excited about this one. A lot of influential people in the room, and a bit of a difference in that we are undertaking a panel discussion this time around, as opposed to a keynote address. And yeah, I'm excited about it, but it is the first time we're doing something of this nature, and so nervous excitement at the same time. But I think it's important that we do get started on time, because this is quite a deep topic, and there's a lot of things to discuss. And I think just to get all of our minds into the space, it would be fantastic if the attendees in the room could actually post in the Q&A some key questions that they have around AI in education. It'll be a great insight into where your minds are at in terms of what your concerns are. We do have a bunch of questions that we're going to address that we've pre-prepared, but it would be fantastic to upcycle some questions from the room. So if you can find the Q&A, and if you've got a pressing question in your mind or a challenge that you're actually facing currently that relates to this, then please post it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will do our best to weave it into the conversation this afternoon. Just to get going, just a warm welcome to you all. It's our first Neo Series Educator session for the year. It's great to see so many partner school educators on with us, really aiming for this to be a productive discussion that adds value to what you're doing in the high school maths space. As most of you may know by now, I'm Crispian Lees. I'm the head of education at Advantage Learn. But more importantly, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this afternoon. And I'm going to start off with Garth Spencer-Smith. Garth, you might recognize his email handle or his website as the Maths Dean. Garth is an expert in maths education, educator training, and resource development. He's been involved in a number of the online high schools, Co-Academy and the Valencia Institute, to mention a few, in a teaching capacity and an advisory and content development capacity. And he runs his own consulting organization, Ukufunda Education Consulting, which is involved in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of education and resource interventions in Southern Africa. So we're really excited to have Garth on the panel. Thanks for your time, Garth. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Crispian. I'm really looking forward to being on the panel and hearing what everybody else says. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Garth. Then our other panelist is Sarel van Greunen. I hope I said that well, Sarel. He is the head of maths at Lebone College in Rustenburg, part of the Royal Bafokeng Nation. And he's got a real passion for maths education, but also a key interest in maintaining the humanity of education in the classroom. And so I think Sarel's going to bring a really key perspective towards this topic as the robots are starting to arrive in our space. Yeah, so he's also a contract educator for the University of Pretoria, and we're very grateful to have him on the panel today. Welcome, Sarel.
Thank you very much, Crispian. I will forgive you for that, for my surname. And you know, Mr. VG also works, but it's been an honor, you know, just being part of this panel, and looking forward to the amazing discussions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarel. I'll get your surname right next time, but Mr. VG is very helpful as well. Then the third external person on the panel is Jason Tame. He's the head of development at the Interaction Design Foundation. I was just saying prior to us coming on that it's really exciting to have Jason on, because he forms part of the Poiki pot of three minds that really brought the online campus at Advantage Learn together, in Jason Tame, Chris Muller, and James Lees, among other key developers on the team. But Jason has been involved with us for many years and really had an instrumental role in us launching the learning management system in the form that it is today. He's got an IT educational background, but after developing a key interest for software development, he pursued the software development profession, but he remains in the educational technology space. So it's very exciting to have Jason back with us, and welcome Jason to the panel.
Great, thank you so much, Crispian, and hello everybody. I'm very excited to be part of this panel today.
Awesome. And then the other two panelists are from the Advantage Learn team. Chris Muller, our Chief Technology Officer, our lead developer of our technological solutions that we develop in-house at Advantage Learn. One of the leading developers in the educational technology space in South Africa, in my probably biased opinion, but it's fantastic to have Chris on. Him together with James, who is our CEO, are two key minds that lead technology advancement and development within Advantage Learn and the deployment of new technologies in our context. They're both notorious early adopters of digital tools. I look back and I think we were one of the first organizations in South Africa to deploy Slack within our organization, to deploy Asana for task management, among other technologies that are now very broadly used. But from both of their sides, they focus on deploying technology in an appropriate way, not using technology for the sake of using technology. And so it's really great to have them on this afternoon. Welcome, James and Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, very excited to be here. I think it's an excellent panel, and the topic is one that is really topical at the moment. So it's going to be a very, very, very interesting discussion, I hope.
Yeah, thank you. Really excited to be here and share the sentiments of the rest of the panel.
Fantastic. Thank you, James and Chris. All right. So just to remind you what this topic actually is, it is AI in the maths classroom, subverting the ends of teaching and learning, ? Okay. And so I imagine there's very many perspectives around the room on this topic, and it's important that we get all of these various perspectives so we can start to formulate our own opinions on this and an approach to how we use or address AI in the maths classroom. And so to start with, I'd like to just get a landscape on what is AI in the maths classroom. How do we understand that? And Garth, if you could potentially give us some context towards that.
Sure, Crispian. So as one does when one's preparing for an AI panel discussion, one uses AI. So I actually went on to ChatGPT and asked them what they thought it was. And I think it's actually a reasonably good definition. So I'll give the definition that ChatGPT gave. I think I said GPI. And then talk about my own ideas beyond that. So it's technology that enables computers to perform tasks that typically would be completed by humans. Technology that does the tasks that humans would otherwise do. And I was thinking in the maths classroom, what does this mean? What sort of AI options are there, shall we say? And I came up with 3 or 4. So the one obvious one is your equation solvers. So you've got your Wolfram Alpha, Photomath, Mathway, and more than a dozen others, where you can literally just take a photo of a question and it'll give you the answer with all the steps of working pretty much instantly. So that's the one thing. Second thing is obviously the chatbots themselves, like ChatGPT and like Google's Bard, and there's others as well, where you can ask them different things about mathematics and get some insights and responses and feedback. Then sometimes we need images in maths as well. We're not only about numbers, of course. So there are the image generators like DALL-E and various others that can help us produce nice images to liven up any materials. And then one that I only discovered yesterday, I didn't know it existed until yesterday, but in kind of researching for this, I found Chat YouTube. I don't know if you know about Chat YouTube, but Chat YouTube is basically a straightforward site. It's just a very plain opening front home screen. It has, you can take the URL of any video you can find on YouTube. You can put it into the box, click enter, and what it'll do is give you a summary of the movie or summary of the video. Not only that, you can ask it any question. So let's say it's a maths video and it's explaining solving quadratic equations or something about Euclidean geometry or whatever. You can actually, if it's a student doing it, you can actually, at any point in the movie, any point in the video, when you don't understand something, you can write a question, and Chat YouTube will give you a decent answer. Well, certainly the times that I've asked it and I've played in it, it gives you a decent answer as to the question that you've asked, which will help explain, so that a child can now, or a teenager can now, when watching the channel, can actually, when they're stuck, when they previously required a human intervention, now AI can help them. So that's, yeah, sorry, quite a long answer, but that's what I see as AI in the maths classroom.
No, that's so valuable. I'm hoping our team is taking notes on all of these tools that you've mentioned, because many of them I've never heard before. And I think that's a great jumping off point in terms of the definition that AI in the maths classroom is essentially any technology that would perform a function in the class that would previously be performed by a human being. And that's a great starting point. So, Garth, I'd like to stick with you for a moment, but before I carry on, I'd like to hand over to James for a contribution from his side.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think yeah, so helpful, Garth. Thank you. What it sparked up for me was, I think we need to also acknowledge that there's these two fields at the moment. One is rapidly increasing at an exponential rate, and the other is going forward quite fast as well. But when it actually happens is a question, and that's the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. And oftentimes when I'm in discussion, and I'm absolutely no expert in these fields, but when we have open discussions around this, I feel like at the starting point, it's quite an important distinction to make, where, Garth has hit the nail on the head, where it's, artificial intelligence is essentially a computer program included with hardware that can actually do certain functions that humans can do. Whereas artificial general intelligence is then leaning more towards the thinking part of it, the intellectual capacity of a human being, which is not there yet, but people are making grounds towards. And so for me, just to kind of to contextualize it, I think we as humans have strong imaginations, and we can jump quite quickly through to the AGI side of AI, where that's actually like, oh, the computer can think like a human and do things like a human and imagine like a human. Where I think it's important we acknowledge we're not there yet. We're at the more narrow task functioning part of AI, which is very exciting and very powerful, but we're not at the AGI part of it. So just wanted to bolt that out on.
Thank you. No, very helpful. Sarel, from your side?
Sorry for maybe jumping in, but I would just like us, before we maybe go further, when we look at the question, it would be great, I think, if we define what does teaching and learning mean. If we look at the question, and I look at this panel discussion, which is fantastic. Are we talking about simply just how is it maybe subverting writing an exam, or is it subverting the type of people we create in our classes? Are we, the panel discussion, because I think that's two very, very different questions to ask. Are we we must talk about, definitely, I think, the reality of a kid will write an assessment at the end of matric. So is AI helping us towards that? But also, how can we use AI in the maths classroom to raise up future leaders in their fields, future, game changers? I don't think we can separate the two. And I think as teachers, we err so much on the portfolios and the assessments and those things that I think we must also just talk about that other one, as you said, the person, how can we help our students to become fully functioning and healthy people at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And I think that's a nice segue, Sarel, to stick with you into something that I think is on everyone's mind to some capacity, is that this introduction of AI is scary because we don't know how it's going to impact our roles as educators, our learners, in terms of the way that they learn. And so maybe to lean in on that, Sarel, what from your perspective scares you the most about the introduction of AI in learning and teaching?
Okay, thank you for that. This morning at about 4 o'clock, I was doing my research, a little bit extra, digging into, one of the issues we come across in our classes that all of you are coming across, which is that learners can't retain information anymore. And I went down an Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole there, because there was some amazing studies that was actually done about what they call brain fog, which is when your brain basically gets overloaded with information. It's a terminology that neurologists and psychologists use when you just have so much information going that you basically sign out. And the problem, and this is kind of the thing that I am concerned about and that scares me, is we are adding more and more and more points of information for our learners to go to. It was the teacher is everything in the class. It became the teacher and YouTube, the teacher and the internet, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Now it is ChatGPT or Bard or all of the ones that's coming. And I'm concerned about the amount of information that actually our kids need to process on a daily basis. Because another article that I came across this morning, which was really interesting, was that multitasking is actually a complete myth. That neuroscientists have done the studies and they see, but the moment you go from one task to another task, it's actually your brain physically has to start spinning another plate. It's like a plate spinner. And the scary thing is that every time that you go from one task to another task, your body actually releases stress hormones. And I'm concerned for our kids because we are telling them, go from this thing, go to another thing, get information here, there, everywhere. So they have to multitask, and every time we add a layer, that's more stress that's coming on. An interesting thing, your prefrontal cortex that I love to talk about, which is not developed according to scientists till the age of 27, is actually that thing that makes you go to different tasks. But it constantly wants to go to the least amount of trouble. So it's going to go to the 6-second snippet you see on TikTok instead of reading a maths book or, getting into a discussion. And our kids don't have the ability, or very few of them have the ability to actually choose. So I'm concerned that by bringing in so much technology in our classes, what effect is it going to have on our kids? Is it always necessary, or must we not kind of, as teachers, decide, let's limit our technology to certain things, And we don't have to expose our kids to everything every time, but to just have the tools in the toolbox and gradually feed it to our kids to almost protect them from themselves. That's kind of my scary thought, because as teachers, we cannot bargain on our parents necessarily teaching the kids the skills on how to protect themselves. So it is unfortunately coming more and more and more onto us as teachers.
For sure. I think you make some exceptionally, you flag some exceptionally scary concerns for educators in the classroom. And I agree with much of what you said, and I love that visualization of the plate spinner. You know, too many things going on in people's heads is not necessarily going to be helpful to learning. So thank you, Sarel, for that. I think it's important to acknowledge, you know, what scares us, and I'd like to check in with any of the other panelists if they have something to add to that before I move on to what potentially excites us about the introduction of AI in learning and teaching. So, Chris, if I can go over to you now, I see your hand up there.
Cool, yeah, thanks. And yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think you made some really good points there. I'm almost segueing more into the excite part, so I hope that Garth, who's also got his hand up, isn't going to jump, but I guess we can toggle between what excites us and what scares us as well. But I really wanted to just touch on something that really excites me about the AI side of it, that's quite different from the information overload of the internet, where I completely agree that there's this massive information overload, and you have to wade through a huge amount of information. And what excites me about this new evolution into the chat GPT space and this evolution of AI, because AI has been around for a while in many different forms. This is just the next evolution of it. And what really excites me about it is that it augments that process of identifying and interacting with the information that's out there in a way that's never really been possible before. And it augments that experience that you have with interacting with that information, that makes it a lot more personal and a lot more specific to you as an individual than ever before in my experience. And as a software engineer, we generally, as software engineers and people in technology, we're exposed to it early, and we're early adopters in these new technologies and new technological evolutions and revolutions. And we've seen it in the software engineering space, and I'll bring it back to the math space now, but I've seen engineers using it daily and getting them from A to B a lot quicker than ever before. And that's because when they have a question, previously they would go to Google and have to wade through all the information. Now they can ask that question to a chatbot like ChatGPT, get an answer, and then interact with it in a way that is personal to them. So they can say, okay, can you explain that in layman's terms? Can you explain it like a 5-year-old? And it gets them from A to B a lot quicker, like exponentially faster than before. And that is just going to get better and better. And that is really exciting about this is evolution. And in the maths context, it's also a technical subject, so it's actually quite easy to relate it back to that. But in the maths context, whereas before, if you went right back to just having the teacher as your information source, you had the way your teacher explained something to you, and that was it. Then you had the internet and the rise of Google and those elements, and then you had all the different ways of how the internet explained it. And now, when a learner interacts with, or a teacher interacts with ChatGPT, they can ask the AI specifically for their context and their understanding and how they will best absorb that information. And they will no doubt get from A to B in terms of understanding that information a lot quicker. It doesn't solve the information overload aspect of it, but it does it does really excite me about how, and it's those creative ways of using AI, not necessarily the hard ways of us introducing, how we're going to write maths exams, and how it's more that soft interaction with information that I'm seeing day to day, that that really excites me about that.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's incredible how it really does feel like a conversation with Chat GPT. I'd like to move to Garth, and then I'd like to move to Jason, all in the realm of what excites us and what scares us in terms of AI in teaching and learning. So Garth, over to you.
Thanks, Crispian. Yeah, I agree with both of the previous speakers. So I just wanted to add a few other points. I think the question that's before us today about whether AI subverts the ends of teaching and learning is not going to be one where we can. It's one of those classic debate discussions or debate topics, right? Where there is definitely a gray area. There's positives and negatives. So it's a bit like the internet, where absolutely the internet has massive benefits, but there's also downsides like fake news, cyberbullying, those kinds of things. And you have to kind of weigh up what's going to be best in your situation and how to mitigate and reduce the impact of the negative side. So I've got a long list of things that are really positive and excite me about AI in the maths classroom. But I wanted to, since we started with some of the things that scare me, that if I don't mind, I'd like to carry on with that road. So I think, and again, I've got a reasonably long list, but two things that are probably top of the list. The one thing is authenticity, what I call the authenticity issue. And that's the question of if you set an assignment or anything that a student takes home and works on at home, how on earth are you going to know that what they are submitting is legitimately from their own brain and not just from an AI's brain? Because with the equation solvers we've got with ChatGPT, just about any assignment you give, they're going to be able to subvert it and submit it, in after 10 minutes of work by just tapping the brain of the AI. And that's where Sarel's point about the undeveloped prefrontal cortex of the human brain as a teenager is a problem, because they're gonna have this choice. Can I do this in 10 minutes and it'll actually be really good, probably in most cases, or am I going to spend an hour and a half on this and really engage with it? And I mean, most teenagers, let's face it, they're going to take the easy road if they can. So the authenticity issue is a big one for me in education. And the second one is what I call the equity issue. So South Africa obviously is an highly unequal education system. I mean, the people that are on this panel and probably almost everyone listening in are highly advantaged in our ability to access technology and devices, and we've got data which can allow us to join this meeting and all of those kinds of things. And the vast majority of South Africans don't have access to that. And so if that issue is not resolved so that people in every school can get access to the benefits of AI, then I think it's just going to exacerbate the already highly unequal nature of South African education, which really does scare me. It's far too unequal already, and it has the potential to make this even worse. Thanks.
Thanks, Garth. Great. Jason, I'd love you to now come in from an educational technology perspective in terms of what excites you and scares you in terms of the introduction of AI in teaching and learning. So, Jason, I'd love to get your take on it.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Crispian. Yeah, it's been a really interesting hearing everybody's perspective so far. I've definitely agreed with everything that's said, both on the positive and on the con side. I think there's a lot to grapple with here. But I think from my side, what I'm really excited about, going beyond apps like ChatGPT or apps that do general use kind of chatting and answering. I'm really excited for the future of training models and filtering them for pedagogical outcomes. So a good example of this type of thing coming into play now, and it's really an early example, it's going to get even better, is Khan Academy's Carnigo AI that they're working on, where they've taken the large language model, the LLM of GPT, and they've trained it to be specifically focused on education. So what happens with Carnigo is you can't go and tell it, here's an algebraic equation, give me an answer, and it'll just spit out an answer, which ChatGPT would unless you prompt it to not do that. With this, you can't just get the answer and move on. it's going to say, I'm very excited that you're so keen to get the answer, but let's dig into this more. What do you think step 1 is? And it's really trained and filtered for that behavior, which is very, very exciting to me, because it can go even beyond that to start looking at things like relevance. You know, if a learner says, why should I learn this? And it can be like, well, that's a great question. What are your interests? I like soccer. Okay, well, algebra and geometry is great to understand training programs and the geometry of free kicks. Like, you can start applying this relevance to the learner's actual context. And that's the kind of thing that I'm extremely excited about with this, is the ability to do that kind of personalized gap analysis, dynamic quizzes based upon the learner's actual needs, really allowing it to explain concepts to learners where they're actually at, and doing that at broad scale. It's not going to replace an educator's ability to understand the context and the emotions. But if you just look at the kind of middle ground that operates in terms of what it can do for scalable tutoring, it's very, very exciting to me. So yeah, I think in the broad sense, that's what I'm most excited about. Briefly on the negatives, I think there's 2 that really worry me. One is related very much to what Garth is saying around that inequality. I also think that this is exacerbated in South Africa, but a global issue around cultural diversity of AI and the models that it represents. You know, it's not, if there is a culture that hasn't been broadly studied or put into training data, it's not going to be representative in the answers that come out. And I think at a large enough timeline, that could cause serious issues where things become a little bit monocultural in a lot of ways. And a country like South Africa with such a rich cultural history, that worries me. And then the second one is motivation. I know if I was a student right now and I was looking at this, I'd be saying, you know, the old question was, well, how does maths relate to the jobs I'm going to do? Well, the question might now be like, well, are there jobs to do? Why am I learning maths to do a job that may not even exist? And it may be very difficult to grapple with that as a concept. I'm very positive that there's an answer to that, but it may be something that many learners are going to be starting to ask.
Amazing. James, over to you on that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, thanks, Jason, for that. I wanted to kind of come in on the inequality part of it from Garth. I think it's such an important point. And Garth, to openly kind of talk to you on this in this forum, is I float between two kind of zones on this. The one is I'm super scared of this, like really increasing that gap between the well-served and the underserved. And also excitement around the possibility of maybe finding more scalable solutions that could actually bring the gap down, which is a really interesting thought experiment. And Jason kind of alluded to it a little bit in there. So it's this constant kind of like toing and froing between the 2 areas. And I guess it depends on the implementation. And yeah, like from my side, in the education space, I mean, I've kind of trying to, for my simple mind, trying to say, you know, what is education's overall overarching kind of goal? And it's in my simple mind, it's to promote human flourishing in whatever context that is. So how can AI, you know, augment, enhance that, not subvert it, is quite an interesting thought. That goes into that. But I think there's both the dark side and then there's the light side, which we're gonna journey with. But one of the things that scares me, Crispin, and I wanted to just add into this, there's lots of excitement from my side, is a oversteer or an overcorrection in the education system. And what I just to kind of frame that, what I mean by that is certain schools, organizations, whatever the educational institution is, steering too hard to the left or steering too hard to the right. That, and Sarel alluded to this, and that scares me. You know, a more moderated approach, I feel we owe that to our students, is a more moderated approach, because the reality is AI in whatever context is here. We can't leave it out and not let people deal with it, not let students engage with it, and we can't let it be too much. You know, I kind of thought in reflection before this panel of like the calculator, you know, was this as much of a jump when the calculator first came out, when it was accessible in the hands of students, not the big, huge ones that were sitting, you know, in multiple parking lots at that stage, like the small handheld calculator. But yeah, I think it's important that the oversteer scares me quite a bit in this AI space, because it's moving so quickly.
Great. I see Sarel's hand is up, so I'm going to move to him shortly, and then we've got a couple of other questions that we want to dive into, but there's also been some great questions coming via the Q&A and via the chat. So after Sarel's input, I'm actually would like to flip to the questions in the chat and the Q&A, and move towards those. I mean, the one question is in my mind is, how can I get AI to mark my test scripts for me? But that's just a joke. Sarel, over to you.
Sorry, Crispy, and I just want to be throw one more fly in the ointment. Just one last little thing that is scaring me about AI is what's happening in India at the moment. If you don't know what's happening in India at the moment, is the Indian government is removing all reference to the Muslims in their history. So how they were ruled by Muslims, or how they were, the Muslim uprisings, etc., 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 is physically being removed out of textbooks. That is what's happening currently in India. And for me, in terms of the AI space, it's a little bit concerning that the people with the money, who's unfortunately controlling the AI bots, and that's paying for the databases to be set up and those kind of things, that kind of bias, we will never really know until maybe it's too late. That if we can get clarity, I'm talking about open clarity, really, that the database and everything, as one of the panelists earlier referred to, that bias towards a specific culture or towards someone else's needs, is just a thing that that kind of cautions me big time, because our kids won't know the difference. Our kids don't know the difference between real information and false information already. And so that is kind of my last fly in the ointment, and I know it's not something we can solve, but it is just something that our kids are also going to start asking us. How do I know that this stuff is really true? Which then can be a phenomenal a point of connection with our kids to actually teach them. So although it's a fly in the ointment that I'm raising, we can then start taking them, but how do I test knowledge? How do I use this to my advantage in my class? Which can, I'm throwing off the top of my head, can lead me towards things like, how do I know whether an equation is valid and credible? You can link these things so amazingly in your maths class, where you can actually change the logic of an AI and ask your kids, but how do I test it? And then ask, how do I apply that testing in my class? So maybe something for someone to go and try in your class.
Fantastic, Sarel. And I think you are talking towards one of the bullets that we wanted to get to, was how can we ensure that the use of AI in the mathematics classroom does not undermine the development of critical thinking skills. So I think I'll give an opportunity for any panelists that sparks something in their heads to raise their hand and respond to that. And then I want to go to the chat and the Q&A. There's some great, really applied questions that I think it'll be good to work through. Are there any additions on undermining the development of critical thinking skills by potentially over implementing AI? Perfect. Let's move forward into the chat and the Q&A. Sarel, Mark Evans is interested in those articles that you mentioned, and I see you have linked them there, which is fantastic. They link to the hosts and the panelists. So Khofi, can I ask you to please reproduce those links out to all attendees in terms of the references that Sarel was referring to. Then I'm going from the chat, Rakubu Sokana is asking, what changes can we expect to see in school-based assessments with the integration of AI in the future? Garth or Sarel, do you see any significant changes to school-based assessments with the integration of AI?
Sorry, I'm just jumping in, but
No
I
problem.
don't think in terms of formal assessment, realistically, we'll be able to see a difference. But I do think that the informal assessment, there is, I think it was John Louis who shared an amazing portfolio item, in the IEB conference, where he was going to take some formulas that don't work or that doesn't work correctly and have the kids investigate that as a portfolio item, where I think so informal assessment, I think AI can play a wonderful role. Garth, you wanted to also add on or say something?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a massive impact on assessment, actually. So the one I've already spoken about, the whole idea of the CAS, all the CAS tasks. How are you going to give a CAS task that a student can't complete without using AI? Or that can only complete without AI. It's going to be very difficult to set tasks like that. I think the final formal exam, if they're sitting on exam conditions, then the AI will not influence that in that immediate time frame. But of course, it will influence assessment in that you can generate questions through various AI options. Although I have tried to get ChatGPT to generate high order and sort of problem solving questions, and it's not particularly good at the moment, but I know that AI is learning from itself and will get better. So maybe that will be something that will be resolved in time. A few other things, there's lots that one could say, but I don't want to dominate. But one thing that AI will soon be able to do, if it can't already, and I know you said it was a joke, Crispian, but they'll be able to mark assessments. They will. Apparently, so I was speaking to Steve Sherman of Living Maths. He's quite a big name in the maths world in South Africa. Many of you probably heard of him. And he said I was speaking to him yesterday, and he said he'd read an article that day about how there's a prototype for being able to, essentially an AI brain that can then decipher handwritten maths text and actually mark it. That's pretty crazy. I'm not sure how good it's going to be, but like all AI, it will get better and better. The other way in which assessments might differ, I think, will be that, and this is a really positive development, it will allow the analysis of the performance data from the children to be done really quickly and easily without teachers spending hours and hours of their limited time, and give you things like personalized, individualized feedback on every child, saying these are the areas that you struggled with, these are the areas to focus on in your future studies, to make sure that any gaps in your knowledge are filled. So I think that's a massive plus. Individualized, personalized programs for learners who are switching schools or switching systems and need to catch up or been away ill for a long time. Those are all really positive things that can help children in the future in maths classroom and others. Thanks.
And an interesting thing, Crispian, and I'm saying that because one of my colleagues, who's I want to say looks like your software engineer, our Jason there at the top, the same similar kind of look. I love this colleague of mine who actually got it right, that a chatbot actually generates worksheets on a properly printable PDF, and it can actually generate the answers to inequalities and to equations that teachers can actually, you go before you say the topic, you say the grade, how many questions you want, and you can even specify, I think, what difficulty levels. And it can generate 20 questions for you in a heartbeat. So I think there's a lot of positives that's there to be explored. But this oak spent 3 months to get it to this point, and we're basically prototyping it at the moment. And but it looks phenomenal. But you need to be basically, I want to say, a computer genius to be able to program with a Python and all of those things. So I think as AI will develop further and you have teachers that understand the software part and the teaching, that will be able to give tools like this, make it available for us, that it can actually minimize your prep time a lot. You know,
Yeah,
so I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of positives maybe with testing as well that can come out there.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's going to be some things that hack forward certain aspects of our roles to enable us to focus more on the most leveraged activities that educators need to be doing. So that's really exciting. I'm going back to the chat now. I've noticed that Charlene has shared a video with us, which Charlene, thanks so much. And Garth has shared also something on living maths, which I think we need to distribute to everyone at the webinar this afternoon. So thank you for sharing that, Charlene and Garth. I want to go to Condia. Condia wants to use AI as a portfolio item, and she's asking, has anyone else tried this? And Sarel, I noted that I think you mentioned that John Louis had spoken about a portfolio item to that extent. Perhaps we can link Condia to that information to assist in the setting of that portfolio item. I don't know if there's any other additions on doing a portfolio item that uses AI. Any other contributions from the panel on that? Okay, then Sandra Kemp is asking, how do we find a balance between needing to teach our kids to function in a high-tech world when they leave school and still get the teaching, curriculum pressure, etc. right? I agree with choosing what to expose our learners to, but also think that we need to use tech where we can. So how do we find a balance between enabling our kids to function properly in a high-tech environment, but also making sure that we get through the curriculum? Any insights to share from the panel?
If no one is going to speak, then maybe I can speak.
Go for it, Sarel, and then James will come in after you.
Oh, awesome. I think the reality is that it's going to be hit and miss. You're going to try something and you're going to fail, and then you're going to try again and make it a little bit better. But I think one of the things that we can definitely do as adults is bring kids into this space of the ability to choose when to do what. That to help them with filtering information instead of shying away from it. To use that critical thinking, like I mentioned just earlier with, how do I know when things are right, when things are wrong? So when we use technology in our class, I believe it can be a fantastic tool and we can show it to our kids, but only as a tool, not as an end in itself, kind of as a means to get through our curriculum. And then I think there might be some success where we as teachers just use it as another tool, like a calculator, instead of using AI as this imaginary end into itself.
Thanks, Sarel. James, over to you.
Yeah, I think Sarel nailed it. I was going to just indicate, I mean, to the teachers in the classroom, it must be such a difficult challenge to get. I think such a great question from Sandra. So yeah, I think I was trying to think about it. If I was in that situation, what the right approach would be, and I don't think anyone knows the right approach right now, was my kind of answer Sarah alluded to, but it probably to just balance those two. One of the things I thought about was when I was at university, how sad it was to learn curricula that was completely out of date. I remember being so frustrated. Yes, I could have got skills from that and all of this and all the rest, but it was really out of date, some of the things that they were teaching us. They were teaching us VBA when the development world had moved far beyond that. And so that curriculum pressure of getting it through, etc., and then the actual utilizing what's in the more market, I guess, or out there is quite a tough balance, and my heart goes out to educators certainly in that respect.
Yeah, it's a very difficult challenge. I've got 3 young kids, and I'm just grateful that they're at the age that they can't have a cell phone. And my wife and I are trying to figure out what we're going to do in terms of technological exposure. And this is exactly the topic that we're trying to navigate here. You know, you have to expose learners to technology in a mindful way. Hannah has a contribution. Hannah Pretorius, and I'm just going to read it out. In terms of assessment, I have a friend who works in AI. He wrote an essay on punctuality and then also asked ChatGPT to write one. He submitted both to an AI checker, and the results were that his essay was deemed as probably written by a bot, and the bot essay was deemed as probably written by a human. So plagiarism checking is probably not an option for AI in the classroom. So we'll have to rethink assessment, and that is a good thing. My question, given the current episodes of hallucination that happens when using bots, how likely is it that this will be sorted out soon? If not, how can we really trust the answers we get from the chatbots? Sure, that's a hard question. I'm glad I'm the moderator and not one of the panelists. I'm going to pass it over to Jason, whose hand is up, and I'm hoping he's got a good contribution there. Go for it, Jason.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. No, my hand was up for this particular question. I think it's an interesting one, and there's 2 different things to kind of unpack here. The first one is, yes, it is not going to be possible to determine to a high level of likelihood whether something is written by a bot or a human. That line of trying to even do that, maybe with GPT-3, it was somewhat possible. With GPT-4 and beyond, it's not going to be possible. You're not going to know the difference. So it's not worth even trying to go down that road. On the first kind of point on that. The second one is this idea of hallucinations, which is very interesting. So hallucination is basically where you start getting the bot returning things with high confidence that are completely false. Like it gives you references that it's made up or just totally incorrect data. As a software engineer, when I'm trying to use it to work in code, it often writes the most ridiculous code that functions that don't exist, and it's totally false. But that's a good thing in a pedagogical sense, because it means that now that you're not saying this is the tool that's going to give you the answer and then you put forward the answer, but it's giving you a means by which to question and critically think and analyze the answers and push back and verify and correct. It gives you a space to engage with the answer and what your discussion in a way that allows for rich learning. So you give it a question, you frame it, it comes up with an answer, and you need to now verify this as a learner. You need to now be really thinking about this and asking it to extrapolate and then determining correctness, not using it as a tool for 100% knowledge. And using it like that in a classroom, or if you frame it like that, I think will be a very, very powerful way to engage with the technology.
Amazing. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything Jason said. I just wanted to also touch on the question that Hannah presented, which was how likely is this going to be that it's sorted out soon? And Jason already mentioned that, you know, version 3 to version 4, there's been a massive improvement. And I think we might even have already forgotten this, but ChatGPT was only launched in November last year, and the second, the kind of next major version of it, the version 4, was launched in March this year, only 4 months later. So we're seeing a really, really rapid development and evolution of this technology, which as a technologist, you know, it's quite daunting and nerve-wracking to experience this massive and very rapid evolution of this technology. And I'm sure for people who aren't technologists, it's even a bit more daunting and scary. But the exciting thing around that is that it is improving very quickly and very effectively before our eyes and as we're using it. So the things like hallucinations and those other concerns are getting better. So I think there's no doubt that the technology is going to keep improving. We might reach a few plateaus along the way where we'll find that the development and the kind of rapid change
you know, in the beginning, I think it was every week people were like, oh my gosh, I can do this, oh my gosh, I can do this, oh my gosh, I can do this. And then that's almost slowed down to a point, and then there'll be a new introduction of something or a new use case or way that we interact with it that'll be introduced, and then we'll go through that cycle again. But there's absolutely no doubt that it's going to keep improving, and I think we just need to be aware of it and try and manage how we use it, and just really enjoy the process and think creatively with how we can use it. And the things like hallucinations, they do exist right now, and so we just need to be aware of them, and that's really good. And then we just use you know, as Jason said, even with software engineering, it's a tool that we use to augment our actual development. It doesn't do the job, and I think that needs to be the context which we use it at the moment. It's not going to do the teaching for you. It's not going to learn for you. It's there to augment those activities.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think in the development space, there's so much potential to expedite development and content development, software development, all of those, which we know are very, very heavy things. They take time. No one understands how long content development actually takes, or software development, and hopefully these tools can expedite that. We're out of time. There was one more question which we didn't get to address. We have focused a lot on the impact it has on students and how they can use it for information. What are some of the ways teachers can be using AI to benefit them and their learners? I think it's a great question. We won't have time to address it. I think if the panelists can give it some thought, and I'll maybe post it out to the panelists in email and then share it in the follow-up email to all of the attendees. And then just to go quickly around the room with the panelists for any closing remarks, we only have 1 minute. Garth, let's go over to you, then to Sarel, then to Jason, then to Chris, and close with James. So Garth, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, we've been in education, and particularly maths education, through many revolutions in the past. And before my time, one of the revolutions was the change from, believe it or not, a fountain pen to a ballpoint pen. I mean, who would have believed it? But apparently, it was a massive battle to get people to agree to that switch. And then sort of 30 to 40 years ago, it was the change from log tables to calculators. And now, of course, we've got this massive new AI thing, which is making us very uneasy. And I guess we've got to just hope that we cope with it as well as we perhaps coped with the previous ones, and learn how to maximize the benefits that we can get from AI, and there are so many of those, and at the same time mitigate and reduce the downsides that it has. Thanks.
Thanks, Garth. Thanks so much for joining us. Sarel, a couple of seconds from you.
Thank you, Garth, for bringing that up, because it's exactly my thoughts. I shared a video on the chat to everyone, which I think all of us must go and show to our maths department. It was filmed before AI, but it talks about all the different revolutions and why did it never really revolutionize education. And this guy, Veritasium, then talks about what is our role as teachers in terms of the connection with kids and bringing our passion over. So it's definitely a worthwhile watch. I showed it to my department as well. And it's something for us to remember, is that this is a tool. We are the educators. And we're gonna break a few eggs, and eventually we are going to make meals and be able to feed our kids the best information. So I think we must dive into this and not be too afraid, but more as well think about, you know, in the end, I want to raise this kid to be able to function in the world out there. So thank you for having me. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarel. It's been great to have you on. Jason, some closing remarks from you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, that'll be brief. So yeah, thank you for this panel. It's been really, really insightful. I think it's so important to be having these discussions as educators and people involved in education. You know, people have mentioned that it's the guys with money and power that are building some of these early versions of tools, and it's important for us to get our voices out there and really to be driving where this technology is going as best as we can in the future, to make sure that it is something that will produce learners capable of critical thinking and thriving ahead. Like it's up to us to really be voicing those concerns and driving that change.
Thanks, Jason. Chris and James. Chris, over to you, and then to James, and then we will close.
Thanks. I'll be very quick. Yeah, thank you for having this panel. I think it's just, yeah, it's really exciting to see these discussions happening in so many different industries. There's been a lot of technical revolutions in the past that don't necessarily get into a lot of the other industries and to the forefront, and it's just been exciting seeing AI and this evolution of AI come to the forefront and be used in real world cases. Jason mentioned Conmigo, Duolingo, the biggest language learning app in the world, has been using it extensively. There's just so many real world use cases, and I think we can all just enjoy that and leverage it as other panelists have said. Instead of being scared of it, it's not going to replace you. You just need to help it, use it to help leverage it and use it in your use cases that you have.
Fantastic. James, if you could perhaps close the session for us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris, for moderating and hosting this session. And just to the esteemed panelists here, just very grateful to all of you for being here. Thank you. I was very surprised to get the call up. We don't usually get to be in these panels, but so thank you for that. But to Garth, thank you so much for joining and for all of your great insights and thoughts here, really valuable. Thank you. And to you, Sarel, as well. Thank you so much for your insights and thoughts and what you've shared this afternoon. And to Jason, for everything that you contributed. Thank you. From my side and from the team here at Advantage Learn, we really do encourage these kind of thoughts both within our organization and externally. And so very grateful to have been a part of this particular topical discussion. I reflect on a quote that we always kind of group around as a team, and that's if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. And that is by famous education philosopher John Dewey. And I think where we are right now with AI is one of these moments where we really need to be constantly thinking through how can we better prepare our learners for the incoming future, no matter what rate that is happening. And so, I just want to say a very big thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon, to Chris for moderating. We just continue to wrestle with this topic, and I hope there'll be a part 2, Crispian, where we can have it in a couple of months or in a year, depending on the rate, and see what the answers would be at that stage. But thanks very much to everyone who has joined and contributed. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, James. Thank you to all the panelists and to all the educators joining us this afternoon. We are slightly over time, but I think it was such a rich discussion. We'll keep you posted on when the next educator session is, although there it is, the 27th of July, and the link to register is in the chat, along with the link to rate the session and give us your feedback. It's so valuable to us. But with that, we're going to close the webinar. Thank you, everyone.